Broxton, Southend Diving. Alex Christian, City of Sheffield Diving Club. Jared Hull, Dive London Aquatics Club. Bo Barry, Southend Diving. Seth Greentree, Plymouth Diving Club. Hunter Mapstone, Southampton Diving Academy. And Rupert Kelly, City of Sheffield Diving Club.
And if, ladies and gents, you could also welcome your Open Group C platform competitors this afternoon. Isaac Ide, Plymouth Diving Club. Brogan Gainfort, City of Leeds Diving Club. Isaac Beck, City of Sheffield Diving Club. Seb Auld, City of Leeds Diving Club. Noah Baker, Dive London Aquatics Club. Connor Craden, Dive London Aquatics Club. Ryan Church, Cambridge Dive Team. Evan Cooper, Darlington. Oliver Dobby, Edinburgh Diving Club. Seb Surrey, Southend Diving. Blair Crooks, Aberdeen Diving Club. Ronnie Reed, City of Sheffield Diving Club. Harry Westbury, Plymouth Diving Club. Lucas Bishop, City of Leeds Diving Club. Rami Cooper, Southampton Diving Academy. Jack Ellis, Southampton Diving Academy. And Hakeem White, City of Leeds Diving Club.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the officials to their seats. Do we have the referee's permission on 3 meters, please?
Referee's permission on platform. Round 1, Open Group C platform. Isaac Ide, Plymouth Diving Club, inward dive piked, 5 meters. Five and a half, 5, 5, 6, 5.5. Brogan Gainfort, City of Leeds Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked. 7.5 meters. 4.5, 5, 4, 5, 5. Isaac Beck, City of Sheffield Diving Club, inward dive piked, 5 metres.
And we're starting on 3 metres with Alfie O'Donnell, Edinburgh Diving Club, inward dive piked.
Five and a half, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. Seb Auld, City of Leeds Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 7.5 metre.
5.5, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 4. Sam Baker, City of Leeds Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
4.5, 4.5, 5, 5, 4.5.
6, 6, 5.5, 5, 5.
Noah Baker, Dive London Aquatics Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 7.5 metre.
Blake Scroxton, Southend Diving, inward dive, piked.
8, 6.5, 7.5, 7, 7.5. Ryan Church, Cambridge Dive Team, forward dive piked, 7.5 metres.
6.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5, 5.5. Jared Hull, Dive London Aquatics Club, inward dive, piked.
6, 6, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Evan Cooper, Darlington ASC, forward dive piked, 5 metres.
5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Bo Barry, Southend Diving, inward dive, piked.
5, 5.5, 5.5, 5, 5. Oliver Dobby, Edinburgh Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 7.5 metre.
5, 5.5, 6, 6, 5.5. Seth Greentree, Plymouth Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
6.5, 5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Seb Surrey, Southend Diving, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 7.5 metre.
6, 5.5, 6, 5, 5.5. Hunter Mapstone, Southampton Diving Academy, inward dive, piked.
5.5, 5.5, 6, 6, 6. Blair Crooks, Aberdeen Diving Club, inward dive piked, 7.5 metre.
5.5, 5, 5, 4.5, 5. Rupert Kelly, City of Sheffield Diving Club, inward dive, piked.
5, 6, 5, 5, 5.5. Ronnie Reed, City of Sheffield Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 5 metres.
6, 5.5, 6, 6, 4.5.
5, 5.5, 5, 5.5, 5.
Round 2 on 3 metres, Alfie. Forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
Harry Westbury, Plymouth Diving Club, inward dive piked, 5 metres. 5, 4, 4.5. City of Leeds Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metres.
Three, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 4. Sam, inward dive, piked.
Six, 6, 6, 6, 5.5. Rami Cooper, Southampton Diving Academy, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre.
4, 4, 5, 4, 4. Blake, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
Five and a half, 5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5.
6.5, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 5.5.
Jack Ellis, Southampton Diving Academy, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre.
Alex, back 1.5 somersaults, half twist, free position.
Five, 6.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6. Hakeem White, City of Leeds Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre.
5, 6, 5, 5.5, 5. Jared, back dive, piked.
Five and a half, 5.5, 5, 6, 5.5. And on to round 2 platform, Isaac, back dive piked, 5 metre.
4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 4, 4. Bo, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
Six, 6.5, 7.5, 7, 6.5.
6, 6.5, 6.5, 5, 6.
Brogan, back dive piked, 7.5 metre.
Seth, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck.
Five and a half, 5, 4.5, 4.5, 5. Isaac, back dive with tuck, 5 metres.
6, 4.5, 5, 4.5, 4.5. Hunter, back dive, piked.
Six, 6, 6, 5.5, 5.5. Stead, inward dive piked, 7.5 metre.
Three, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 4. Rupert, forward dive, piked.
6, 6.5, 6, 6, 6. Noah, arm stand somersault piked, 7.5 metre.
6, 6, 6.5, 6, 6. Round 3 on 3 meters. Alfie, back 1.5 somersaults with tuck.
Six, 6, 5.5, 6, 6.5. Connor, inward dive piked, 5 metre.
Four, 3.5, 4, 3.5, 3.5.
6, 6, 6, 6, 7.
Sam, back dive with tuck.
Ryan, inward dive piked, 5 metre.
Five and a half, 6, 6, 5, 4.5. Blake, back dive, piked.
5.5, 6, 5, 5, 5.5. Evan, inward dive piked, 5 metre.
Four and a half, 5, 4, 4.5, 4.5. Alex, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
6, 6, oh, apologies. 6, 6, 6, 6, 6.5. Oliver, arm stand somersault piked, 7.5 metre.
5, 5.5, 5.5, 5, 5.5. Jared, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked. 6, 6, 6, 5.5, 5.
6.5, 6, 5.5, 6, 6.
Bo, back dive, piked.
Seb, arm stand somersault piked, 7.5 metre.
5, 5, 5, 4.5, 5. Seth, back 1.5 somersaults, piked.
6, 6, 6, 6.5, 6. Blair, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre.
4.5, 4, 4.5, 4, 5.
5.5, 6, 6, 6, 6.
Hunter, reverse dive, piked.
Ronnie, back dive piked, 5 metre. 5, 5, 5.5, 5, 5. Harry, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 5 metre.
6, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 6. Rupert, back dive with tuck.
4.5, 5, 4, 4.5, 5. Lucas, back dive piked, 5 metre.
5, 4, 5, 4, 4.5. On to round 4 on 3 metres with Alfie, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck.
Five and a half, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Rami, inward 1.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre.
Five, 5, 6, 4.5, 4.5. Sam, inward 1.5 somersaults piked.
5.5, 5, 5.5, 5, 4.5. Jack, inward dive piked, 7.5 metre.
2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 3, 3. Blake, reverse dive with tuck.
Five and a half, 6, 4.5, 5.5, 5. Hakeem, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre.
4.5, 4, 5, 4.5, 4. Alex, forward 2.5 somersaults with tuck. Five, 5.5, 5, 5.5, 4.5.
5.5, 5, 5, 5.5, 5.
Jared, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck.
Onto platform round 3. Isaac, reverse dive piked, 5 metre.
Five, 6, 6.5, 5.5, 5.
6, 6, 5, 5.5, 5.5.
Bo, reverse dive with tuck.
Brogan, reverse dive piked, 7.5 metre.
5.5, 5, 5.5, 5, 6. Seth, reverse 1.5 somersaults with tuck.
6, 5.5, 5, 5.5, 6.5. Isaac, reverse dive with tuck, 5 metre.
5, 5, 4, 5, 4.5. Hunter, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
4.5, 5, 4.5, 4, 4.5. Seb, reverse dive pike, 7.5 metre.
5.5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 5.5.
5.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6, 6.
Rupert, reverse dive with tuck.
Noah, reverse dive piked, 7.5 metre.
6.5, 5.5, 6.5, 6, 6.
4.5, 5, 3.5, 4.5, 4.5.
And the final round of dives on 3 metres. Alfie O'Donnell, Edinburgh Diving Club, reverse 1.5 somersaults with tuck.
Connor, back dive piked, 7.5 metre. Five and a half, 5.5, 5, 5.5, 6. Ryan, back dive piked, 7.5 metre.
3.5, 4, 3.5, 4, 2.5. Sam Baker, City of Leeds Diving Club, forward 2.5 somersaults with tuck.
Five, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5.
5, 5, 5, 5, 5.5.
Evan, arm stand dive straight, 5 metre.
Blake Scroxton, Southend Diving, inward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
Six, 7, 7, 7, 7. Oliver, back dive piked, 7.5 metre.
4.5, 6, 4.5, 5.5, 5.5. Alex Christian, City of Sheffield Diving Club, inward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
Four and a half, 4.5, 4.5, 4, 5. Seb, back 1.5 somersaults, half twist, free position, 7.5 metre.
7, 7, 7, 7, 6.5. Jared Hull, Dive London Aquatics Club, forward 2.5 somersaults with tuck. Five, 5, 5, 4.5, 5.5.
6, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 7.
Bo Barry, Southend Diving, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck.
Blair, reverse dive piked, 5 metre.
Five, 5.5, 6, 5.5, 5.
5, 5.5, 5, 5, 5.
Seth Greentree, Plymouth Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, 1 twist, free position.
Ronnie, reverse dive piked, 5 metre. Four, 4, 4, 4, 4.5.
5, 5.5, 4, 6, 4.
Harry, back dive piked, 5 metre.
Hunter Mapstone, Southampton Diving Academy, inward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
5, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 5. Lucas, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre.
6.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6.5, 6.5. And our final diver, Rupert Kelly, City of Sheffield Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked.
Six, 6.5, 6, 6, 5.5.
6, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 5.5.
Rami, back dive piked, 5 metre.
And that concludes the competition on 3 meters. Thank you, divers, coaches, team managers, officials, and volunteers.
Five, 5, 4.5, 5, 5. Jack, back dive with tuck, 5 metre. Five, 6.5, 6.5, 5.5, 5.5. Hakeem, back dive piked, 5 metre. Five, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. And on to round 4. Isaac, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 5 metre. Six, 6, 6, 6, 5.5. Divers, just to be aware on platform that the referee will now be using the whistle. Brogan, forward 2.5 somersaults, piked, 7.5 metre. Five, 5.5, 4, 4.5, 4.5. Isaac, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 5 metre. Six, 6, 6, 5.5, 5.5. Seb, inward 1.5 somersaults, piked, 5 metre. Seven and a half, 7.5, 7, 7, 7. Noah, back 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Four, 4, 4.5, 4, 4. Connor, reverse dive piked, 7.5 metre. 7, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 7. Ryan, reverse dive piked, 5 metre. Four, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5. Evan, arm stand somersault piked, 5 metre. Six, 7, 6.5, 6, 6. Oliver, reverse dive piked, 7.5 metre. Four and a half, 5, 4, 3.5, 5. Seb, forward 1.5 somersaults, 2 twists, free position, 7.5 metre. Five, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. Blair, arm stand somersault piked, 7.5 metre. Five and a half, 4.5, 6, 5.5, 6. Ronnie, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Four and a half, 5.5, 4.5, 5.5, 5. Harry, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Five, 5.5, 4.5, 5, 4. Lucas, forward 1.5 somersaults, 1 twist, free position, 5 metre. Five, 6, 6, 6, 6. Rami, reverse dive with tuck, 5 metre. 3.5, 3.5, 4, 3.5, 3.5. Jack, reverse dive with tuck, 5 metre. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Hakeem, forward 1.5 somersaults, 1 twist, free position, 5 metre. 5, 5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. And onto platform round 5, Isaac, arm stand somersault piked, 5 metre. 5, 4.5, 4, 4.5, 5.5. Brogan, inward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 7.5 metre. 4.5, 5.5, 5, 5.5, 4.5. Isaac, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. 4, 5, 4.5, 4.5, 4. Seb, back 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. 2.5, 3, 3, 3.5, 3. Noah, inward 1.5 somersaults piked, 5 metre. 6, 6, 5.5, 5, 5.5. Connor, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 5 metre. 4.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5, 5. Ryan, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 5 metre. 6.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7. Evan, forward 1.5 somersaults piked, 5 metre. 5, 6, 5.5, 5.5, 4.5. Oliver, back 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Three, 3.5, 3, 4, 3. Seb, forward 2.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre. Five and a half, 6, 5.5, 5, 5.5. Blair, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Five, 4.5, 4.5, 5. Ronnie, arm stand somersault piked, 7.5 metre. Four and a half, 4.5, 3.5, 4, 4.5. Harry, back 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Five, 5.5, 5, 4.5. Lucas, inward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 7.5 metre. Five and a half, 7, 5.5, 6, 6. Rami, forward 2.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre. Five, 4, 4.5, 4.5. Jack, arm stand somersault piked, 7.5 metre. Five and a half, 5, 4.5, 5. Hakeem, forward 2.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre. 4.5. And your final round for the Open Group C platform, Isaac Hyde, Plymouth Diving Club, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Four and a half, 5, 4, 4, 4. Brogan Gainfort, City of Leeds Diving Club, back 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Four, 3, 3.5, 4, 3.5. Isaac Beck, City of Sheffield Diving Club, arm stand somersault piked, 5 metre. Six, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 5.5. Seb Auld, City of Leeds Diving Club, forward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Five and a half, 6.5, 6.5, 6, 6. Noah Baker, Dive London Aquatics Club, forward 2.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre. Five, 5.5, 4, 5, 5. Connor Craden, Dive London Aquatics Club, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Seven and a half, 6.5, 6, 6.5, 6.5. Ryan Church, Cambridge Dive Team, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Five, 6, 5, 5.5, 5.5. Evan Cooper, Darlington ASC, reverse dive with tuck, 5 metre. Five, 5, 5, 5, 5. Oliver Dobby, Edinburgh Diving Club, inward 1.5 somersaults piked, 7.5 metre. Six, 6, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Seb Surrey, Southend diving, inward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 7.5 metre. Five, 4.5, 4.5, 5. Blair Crooks, Aberdeen Diving Club, forward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Four and a half, 6, 5, 5.5. Ronnie Reed, City of Sheffield Diving Club, forward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Five, 4.5, 5, 4.5, 5. Harry Westbury, Plymouth Diving Club, forward 1.5 somersaults, 1 twist, free position, 5 metre. Five, 4, 4.5, 5, 4.5. Lucas Bishop, City of Leeds Diving Club, back 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 7.5 metre. Five, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 4.5. Rami Cooper, Southampton Diving Academy, inward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 7.5 metre. Four and a half, 5, 5, 5, 5.5. Jack Ellis, Southampton Diving Academy, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck, 5 metre. Five and a half, 4, 5.5, 4, 5. And your final diver this afternoon, Hakeem White, City of Leeds Diving Club, inward 2.5 somersaults with tuck, 7.5 metre. 4.5, 4.5. And that concludes your open Group C platform competition this afternoon. Thank you, divers, coaches, team manager, officials and volunteers. That concludes session 2 of the 2024 Swim England Diving National Age Groups.
The boards are now open for 20 minutes restricted training for events 5